Hi, I'm Chad, and today I'm going to turn some hackberry. This is a log that I've had sitting around for a while. I actually just picked it up off the side of the road. Um, I've probably had it a year, and you can see it's got a fair amount of nice spalting in it, which hackberry spalts quite well. Um, it's a little different look from spalted maple most of the time, but still has nice colors and nice lines, and people seem to be attracted to it. It can also be fun to add some color to. So where I live, hackberry grows everywhere, and that's central Kentucky. But they get cut down all the time, and luckily for us, the wood actually turns quite well. It's kind of high on my list of woods I like to turn, and it's pretty cooperative, has nice texture. Like I said, it can spalt nicely, but if you get it before it spalts, then it can have a very nice pale cream color that you can add color to. Um, has kind of an interesting grain structure. It almost looks pixelated uh, on, I guess, the quarter sawn surface. And um, so we'll see all that as I turn this log. And so what I've got here, it's pretty well centered as far as the pith goes. And you can see it's a little oblong, kind of egg shaped, and it's kind of consistent on both sides. So I'm thinking that that's going to be the top of a bowl, and so that should give it a nice dramatic kind of pointier edges. And I don't know whether the bark's going to stay on this piece or not. It's been sitting around a while. Hackberry, the bark does stay on relatively well, but given the age of this piece, it very well may fly off early in the process. The first step is to mount the blank between centers and make sure that everything looks good and even, so we end up with a well-balanced piece at the end. So I like to look at it a few times from a few different perspectives. Now we're going to begin the initial process of shaping the outside and creating a tenon. I start by taking light cuts and removing the corner parts of the log, and then using mostly a push cut, I will remove a good amount until I'm pretty close to the outside shape that I like. It'll take just a couple of minutes, but with the tailstock in the way, it can be tough to get a good push cut. Before I get too far along, I'm going to make the tenon on the bottom here. Initially, get the shape with the bowl gouge, and then come in with a skew and flatten out that shoulder and sharpen up the corner. Make sure I've got a nice dovetail shape that will fit into my chuck jaws and sit flush, so I have good stability when I turn it around in the chuck in a few minutes. I continue shaping the outside, and you can see here as I rub the piece, there's little bits falling off. This wood is pretty punky. It's on the verge of rotted. I probably should have got to this blank a little sooner, but I think it'll turn out okay. You can see that I'm again using a push cut, and in just a moment I'll show you the cut that will help take care of that punkiness and leave a much nicer finish on the outside. For the top edge of the bowl, even though the bark probably isn't going to stay on, I'm going to cut down the side of the bowl. And in this case, it's mostly to prevent taking a chunk out of the edge, the top edge of the bowl where it would be most visible. So just a little extra precaution there. So now I'm making my first attempt at a nice shearing cut, and that's what will help deal with this punky wood. This is a great cut to learn. It can save you so much time and frustration with torn out grain, and it's sort of a floating bevel cut with the cutting edge of your gouge almost vertical. You would drop your right hand way down low when you're making this cut, and you'll see me use it on the outside of the bowl again in just a minute. With the bowl reversed, I'm going to true up the outside again, and then I'll use that shearing cut, and you can see how the handle is dropped low. And with this tool rest, it's not the easiest cut to achieve. It's easier to do it on the ends as opposed to the center of the rest, where you can't get the handle of the tool down quite far enough. But a low profile tool rest or something would probably help, but it can be done. You just have to kind of work it around as I'm doing here. And once you learn how to make this cut, it will change your turning. It is very handy. On the top side of the bowl, I start by just clearing out some of the bulk and getting the bark out of the way, and working my way out to be to about an inch thick. And then with the bulk out of the way, I'll be able to start approaching the walls and working those down to the final thickness. I like using the tailstock initially just to help to stabilize the piece and reduce any vibration and let me get some of the weight out of it. And then I remove the tailstock so I can get much better access to the inside. Then I start by just removing a little more of what will be in the way of my tool rest. And then I'll start working down the sides of the bowl. I'm bringing it down to about 3/4 of an inch here, maybe half an inch. Ultimately, I'll get them down to a quarter or maybe just over a 1/4 inch in thickness. So the tool rest can make a huge difference with a bowl, especially one this deep. And my favorite for something like this is my robust J-shaped tool rest. You can do it with the straight one or with a shorter straight one, but this one lets you get right down in that curve and gives you a nice stable cut. So I'm working my way down about an inch or two at a time and blending each section together as I go. As I go deeper into the bowl, you'll see I do kind of this peak and valley alternation, and that way I'm not going too far down in the center or too far down on the outside. One great thing with natural edge bowls that are real oblong like this, or with square bowls, is that you can look down the profile of it as you're turning and see how consistent your wall thickness is as you go. So you don't have to stop quite as often, but down here in this curve, you'll see me stop several times, and I will eventually switch to a smaller gouge to get through that bottom curve and get it consistently thick with the rest of the wall. As I approach the bottom with the smaller gouge, I'll just clean up that curve and try to transition into the bottom of the bowl, and then use my round nose scraper to clean up the bottom portion. So as you can see, this stuff spalts quite a bit, and there's a fine line between spalted and rotted, and like this is that line. As you can see, I've actually got a hole here where the pith is falling out, and I can see some traces of cracking, checking from the pith. So this thing doesn't blow apart on me while I'm sanding it, I'm gonna use a little bit of CA glue to reinforce mostly this spot right around that hole. I don't really want to like saturate it and have a spot that looks like it's full of CA glue. So I'm going to use a little bit of the black and a little bit of some clear thin to get in those spots just pretty strategically, so it has, you know, minimal visual impact hopefully, but should still hold the piece together. Um, and as you can see, the bark was not holding on there, so that's fine. I'll just go around and with some sandpaper probably and just kind of smooth that out a little bit. But, you know, makes for a pretty cool looking bowl. I'm gonna go ahead, reinforce this, sand it, and we'll see how it looks at the end. One quick note, even though it looks like I'm putting a ton of super glue on this, really I'm just barely touching the tip to the wood and squeezing it right to the end so it lets the wood just draw a little bit out. I'm doing my best to avoid any sort of spotches or splotches that will show up in the finished bowl. I start the sanding with 120 grit, then I'll move to 180, 220, and 320. But first I use the 120 to remove any sort of obvious tool marks, grain tear out, things like that. And that usually does a good job, especially on spalted wood. It's you know, not terribly hard, obviously. I'm using 2 soft pads on my sander because I want that to absorb the shock of the uneven bowl. And that way I can run the lathe and do some portion of the sanding at least with the bowl rotating. And you always want to be sure that depending on the rotation of the bowl, you're holding your sander at an appropriate angle so the approaching bowl is never going to hit the underside or the, I guess, trailing side of your sander. This is important because it'll just rip the sandpaper off your sander, or worse, pull it out of your hands, or break the bowl and knock it loose, or do something like that. So it is a little risky to take this approach. If you're not comfortable doing it, definitely don't do it. I do this all the time, and you know, you just have to pay attention and be careful. I think at this point I might be making a mistake with the way I'm sanding the bottom due to the softness and punkiness of the wood. I believe I'm creating some divots that will ultimately show up in the final bowl. You can feel them, but you can't really see them at the end. And I mention them, but I believe this is where that problem occurs. If I had kept the bowl spinning and maybe didn't use quite such a soft pad so it wouldn't conform to those soft valleys that have, you know, been formed, then I may have been able to graze the surface and get a cleaner, more consistent surface using a stiffer pad. So we're sanded now through 320 grit, and it's looking pretty good. Obviously it's punky. I'm going to finish it with a penetrating oil, so that'll you know, get deep down into the wood fibers and you know, help to give it a little more rigidity and strength. But before we do that, which I'm not actually going to do on video today, the last step I'm going to do is remove the tenon and kind of turn it into a little foot. So here's our bowl. It's not quite finished, still needs oil or, you know, finish of your choice on it. I'm gonna definitely use oil. The wood still has some moisture in it. Thickness is pretty consistent, so I don't think that's going to be an issue. Because it's spalted, there's soft spots, so you know, when you're power sanding soft spots or even you know, hand sanding soft spots, they you know, tend to show up. So it's got some texture to it, we'll say. But you know, it looks nice. Still a bowl, still works. You know, they're not all masterpieces, but you know, pretty cool for free wood that really has very little other commercial use other than pallets or something like that. So that's the Hackberry bowl, Spalted Hackberry. I hope you're able to get your hands on some and give it a try. It's nice wood. So I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you'll please hit like and subscribe and come back for the next video. Thanks again for watching.